So you're thinking about moving to Portland, Oregon, maybe you're a city dweller, maybe you want to be out in the country, maybe the suburbs are right for you. Great news, Portland has it all, and we're going to show you that right now.
Hey, what's up everybody? This is Paul and Seth. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Paul and Seth coming to you from Portland, Oregon. If this is your first time to the channel living in Oregon, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. Today we're talking about what type of environments you can get in the Portland metro area. Urban living, suburban, and there's some country living as well. So we're going to talk about all of that today. We get people reaching out to us all the time who are thinking about moving to the area. So if that's you, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link below in the description of this video and schedule a Zoom call with us. However you decide to get a hold of us, we'd love to help. And stick around to the end because we're going to have a bonus category that we're going to talk about as well.
Hey everyone, so if you've never been to Portland, or maybe you're not familiar with all the different parts of Portland, maybe you're out of state and you've only seen, maybe some things on the news about Portland, maybe that's your only impression of Portland. Portland is a very diverse area. We have a lot of different lifestyles and a lot of different environments that you can live in throughout the Portland metro area. Of course, we have city living downtown, but you do have a lot of suburban living and country living not too far away from the downtown area.
Yeah, look, I mean, we get a lot of people who are relocating to the area who kind of have an idea in mind of what type of environment that they want to live in. And one of the biggest challenges is understanding where they should be narrowing their search and what areas are going to make the most sense for them. Portland proper, kind of close into downtown and within about maybe 60 to 70 blocks on each side, you're going to get mostly a pretty urban feel, and I think that's probably what most people understand or have in mind when they think about Portland. I mean, the great restaurants, the bars, concert venues, parks, all that good stuff. But if your only context or kind of perspective of Portland is from like watching Portlandia or, God forbid, watching the news in the last couple of years, there's a lot more that you can get. And there's also some parts of Portland, Portland itself, within 5 minutes of downtown, that are probably a lot different as far as the environment that you're living in than you would think. So, then you get out into the suburbs, there's a lot of great options, and then outside that urban growth boundary in particular, there's a lot of country living.
Yeah, so if you're somebody maybe that's like moving here for a job, which a lot of people are, and like Paul said, kind of what people think about when they think of Portland from outside of the area is maybe just what you've seen on TV. So if you're thinking about like, hey, where do I want to move? Maybe I want to be in a more of a suburban area or more of a country area. Well, good news, if you do need to be in close proximity to Portland for work or family or whatever reason, but you maybe don't necessarily prefer city living, you do have country living that is very close to Portland. There's a lot of places, maybe 30 minutes, that you can go to where you're seeing farms and cows and pastures. I know one of the last neighborhoods I lived in a new subdivision, and a neighbor had a horse, in their yard. It was like a 10 or 11,000 square foot lot too. It's not like a big lot, a pretty small lot to have a horse, quite frankly. But I remember one day coming home from work, the owner is walking the horse down the middle of the street, and this is 23, 24 minutes outside of downtown Portland. So you do have quite a big diversity of different types of lifestyles and living around Portland. It's not necessarily just the city living.
Yeah, so let's maybe kind of define, at least maybe from our perspective, what those particular types of environments look like, and then we can talk about some of the pros and cons of living in these different areas, and then we can talk about where you can find these different areas as well. So we'll kind of go through that in this video, but I don't know, I mean, you tell me if you agree, but I would classify urban living as, like I said, pretty much anything within 50 to maybe 70 blocks of downtown Portland. That's all going to be considered pretty urban. But you also have some of the towns surrounding Portland, what you would call the suburbs, that have little downtown areas and neighborhoods kind of right there where you can, walk 5 minutes to several restaurants and shops and coffee shops and things like that. So, I would consider that to be a little bit of an urban feel, at least in some of these places. And then you have like straight up suburbia, where you have big planned developments with, 500 plus houses, generally smaller lots, and kind of everything that you would think of the stereotypical suburban living. And then as far as the country goes, we're talking about, bigger lots, way more spread out, big country, roads and highways, acre lots up to 5 acres, things like that, and sometimes more. So I don't know, does that sound about right?
Yeah. So city living, 70 blocks within a radius around like downtown Portland, that's probably about right. And a good point about the urban living too, because there's, I don't know, maybe half a dozen towns around Portland. We're currently in Lake Oswego, which is about just 10 minutes, maybe even less than 10 minutes, just south of Portland. And they have a downtown that for some people might give you an urban feel. A Beaverton downtown might give you an urban feel.
Definitely.
There's at least like a half a dozen different towns that are sort of in the suburbs of Portland that have a downtown that also have an urban feel. So if you kind of want that city living, but you don't necessarily maybe want to be in downtown Portland, you do have some other choices that are pretty close to Portland if you need to stay in proximity.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are going to be some of the pros and cons of living in a more urban area? Let's maybe start with Portland, and then we can break out from there a little bit. Portland has neighborhoods, kind of in particular in southeast and some areas of northeast and northwest Portland that are like, exactly what you would think of in kind of living in an urban area. And if you're kind of picturing living in Portland, these are going to be the areas, that you have in mind, I would think. Neighborhoods like, off Division Street, off Hawthorne, off Stark, and then into northeast, like Alameda, places like that. These are all, pretty residential, but they all have kind of main strips of like bars and nightlife and things like that. And then northwest Portland is great too. But you're just like 10, 12 blocks from the Pearl District and then the rest of downtown. So, kind of urban living in Portland is probably going to be a little bit different than quote unquote urban living in like a Beaverton, Lake Oswego, Milwaukee, Hillsborough, for example, areas like that have little downtowns. And I think biggest thing probably in the bigger city, you're looking at maybe a little higher crime rate, you're going to see some more homeless people. It might not be as well kept and as clean as some of, kind of the suburban areas, but then there's definitely some trade-offs there.
Definitely. I mean, you can't go without talking about restaurants. I mean, obviously Portland has some of the best restaurants in the country, and there's just no shortage of restaurants really that you can walk to pretty much anywhere that you're going to live, like kind of whether it's on the east side or the west side of Portland. Things to do, obviously, professional sports team. We have the Portland Trailblazers, we have the Portland Timbers, the Portland Art Museum, OMSI. So there's going to be a lot more things to do, a lot more food, a lot more going on, as you might imagine in a bigger city. But with that comes, some of the other things like the crime and the homelessness. Now you do have a lot of other things to do in the suburbs as well. But just not kind of like the same things. The suburbs, you're going to be looking at more like stuff like a family fun center type of thing, like a Langler's, a Big Owl's, a Dave and Buster's, the places where Bullwinkles, where you've got bowling and video games and laser tag and all that kind of stuff, and usually, stuff for the adults too. So you're going to find a lot more of that kind of out in the suburbs. That's kind of going to be more of your entertainment in the suburbs as opposed to the city, where you're going to have some stuff, like the art museum and sports teams and kind of the nightlife that you just won't find in the suburbs.
Yeah, way more to do kind of in a city center for sure. And being kind of close in Portland is probably kind of the pinnacle of that. And I think maybe a misconception, at least to some degree, is, suburbs are kind of only for families and city living is only for like younger people, for example. But all throughout the Portland area, close to downtown, there's a ton of families. So you know, it's not like if you're coming here with a family or you know thinking about raising a family, you can't do that in the city. There's a lot of people who do that, and Portland is a great place for kids. There's a lot of activities for adults, obviously, but there are a lot of great activities for kids as well. I would say, you know, one thing about being in a more urban setting, whether that's you know, in and around downtown Portland or kind of close in some of these areas, say like Lake Oswego, for example, where we're at today, is the price per square foot is going to be a lot higher. Your home values are going to be a lot higher. And maybe not in Lake Oswego, but in particular in Portland, you're going to see a lot of houses that have deferred maintenance. You know, you're going to see older homes, you know, that have property values that are really propped up by their proximity to kind of, you know, the town center and everything that's going on, but they're going to be a little more expensive. So that is another trade-off. And living in an area where there's a lot going on, is, you know, houses do tend to be a little more expensive.
Yeah, yeah. So for country living, obviously there's not going to be as much to do with the country living, you know, so you might either have to travel to Portland or somewhere in the suburbs. I would say if you're country living, things to do, biggest thing probably around Portland and just Oregon in general is going to be farms. Lots of farms that are sort of designed with the family in mind, you know, things to do for the kids. So you've got your pumpkin patches in the fall time. You've got your berry picking and flowers and stuff like that in the springtime. And then some of these places have stuff in between, you know, they've got animals and stuff like that for, you know, the kids to check out, you know, stuff, you know, petting, you know, zoo type things. So the farms are kind of what you do with the country living, but even so, if you get that country living, you can be like 30 minutes to downtown Portland if you still want to go to like a Blazer game or still want to go to like some food or a restaurant that you wouldn't normally find closer to where you live.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it just depends on the lifestyle that you want, what you're moving here for. You know, we've worked with a lot of people who are moving into the Portland area, and you know, they want a half an acre to an acre of land, and you're not going to get that in, you know, a suburb or, you know, especially an urban area. You know, in fact, that amount of land in an urban area is going to cost the same amount as a house would in, you know, maybe, you know, some of these less populated areas, for example, just because of the development potential. So, yeah, I mean, you know, there's trade-offs with everything for sure. You know, and I think probably the biggest point here is that there is something offered to everybody, kind of, you know, regardless of what type of environment you want to live in. We talked about some of the trade-offs and pros and cons for urban living. If you're in a more suburban area, generally you're going to be further from downtown, so you're going to be further away from kind of a lot of that action. And there are some suburbs that, you know, aren't necessarily cheap. Especially the ones that are kind of immediately bordering Portland. So if you look
where we're at right now.
Yeah, if you look at like Lake Oswego, which is just south of Portland, Portland's right on the Willamette River here, which is where we're at today. So you just go, I don't know, about 8 miles south, and you're getting into Lake Oswego. And then Beaverton borders Portland all on the west side. You have kind of Gresham, Troutdale areas to the east, but then especially like Milwaukee, which is just across the river here.
One of the top kind of upcoming areas around Portland.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. You know, turning over a lot in recent years. You know, these are areas that are, you know, property values are going to be, you know, propped up quite a bit because of the proximity to downtown. And then there's other suburbs, you know, kind of even further out, that have probably an even more suburban, you know, feel when you think about, you know, quote unquote suburbs, that might be a little more attainable as far as, you know, the home values, but, you know, you might be 30 minutes into downtown if you hit a little traffic.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you think about when you think like quintessential city living for Portland, quintessential suburb, and then quintessential like country? What are like the areas that you think of?
Well, I'll go first, and how about you name some after that? So, you know, immediately I think of Beaverton because it kind of has it all. And
for a suburb?
For a suburb, yeah. But it also has some urban living too. You know, Beaverton has a lot of newer developments, you know, big planned communities that very much feel like suburbs, but there's some areas in Beaverton where you can get downtown in 10 minutes. So it really does kind of have it all. But if you're thinking of like, in your head what a suburb might kind of look and feel like, definitely some areas of Tigard, and I would say probably Tualatin, more than anything, in my opinion, feels like the most suburban area of Portland. Now, if we're talking about more kind of that urban living, kind of within Portland city limits, Southeast Portland inside of 82nd. Northeast Portland, Northeast Portland has these really cool old residential areas, that are, maybe 10, 12 blocks from, kind of a hip area with bars and restaurants and stuff like that. There's also like St. John's in North Portland, which is, you get like city views from the north side. That's really cool. I think one area that kind of flies under the radar, that really feels like a suburb, but it's in Portland city limits, is pretty much all of Southwest Portland. So you have areas like Multnomah Village, Raleigh Hills, that are primarily residential, and feel, a lot of mid-century homes, kind of built 40s, 50s, 60s, around that era, that are kind of these old Portland neighborhoods, but are a 10-minute drive into downtown, but you're just up over the hill, so you don't really feel like you're in the city. I think that flies under the radar a little bit, but and then from there you can pretty much anywhere on the west side. If you go south of Hillsboro or west of Tigard, west of Tualatin, you're into a wine country around like Cooper Mountain in that area. I mean, there's dozens of wineries out there, and it's super rural. So, quite a diverse landscape for sure.
Yeah. I guess when I think of kind of like quintessential city living, I think of probably the Pearl District.
Sure.
Probably one of the most popular spots in Portland. Popular spots because of the best restaurants, things to do, great location. So obviously the real estate is very expensive there as well. But that's kind of an area where, like, if you live outside of downtown Portland, and you're somebody that goes to Portland to go for food or things to do, some people do, some people don't, from the suburbs or wherever that may be. Oftentimes people go to like the Pearl District, or just to hang out or shop or whatever. So I really kind of think about like that's kind of like the quintessential city living. And then for suburbs, I think of Happy Valley.
Yeah.
The Happy Valley, if you look at Happy Valley on a map, the thing about Happy Valley is you can drive like through neighborhoods for just miles and miles without even coming to like a main road. Like you can really get lost in Happy Valley because it's frankly probably overdeveloped. There's probably not enough stores and schools and everything else to support all of those houses.
I'd say that takes the cake over Tualatin. Happy Valley.
Happy Valley is definitely, it's just houses and trees for days and days, without seeing anything else. And then city living, closest are, not city living, country living, I would say probably Oregon City. Closest proximity to Portland. You could say Canby as well. Canby's a little bit farther, but if you want to go drive somewhere where you're going to see some pastures and farms and cows and all that stuff, Oregon City's probably the closest thing, I think, to Portland. And again, that's probably 25 minutes from Portland. So, all within a 30-minute radius. You've got city and urban living, you've got suburbs, and then you've also kind of got the country in certain places in the Portland metro area.
Yeah. So I think as a little bit of a recap, for kind of these different environments that Portland offers and that that you could live in, I think in the city the benefits are obvious, and I think some of the cons, the people who want to live in the city are willing to look past, but it's going to be more congested. There's going to be more things like crime and homeless people. There are parts of Portland that are very desirable and areas that people hang out a lot in that, just one block off the main street, you see several tents, for example. So, not steering anyone or saying anything good or bad about that, but that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're right in the city and you're kind of near it all, and you get to enjoy all the things that kind of that city life offers.
Which it's a beautiful city too.
Yeah, no, totally.
It's a great downtown, and yeah, it's Yeah, when you're not stepping over somebody that's laying on the sidewalk.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Which is not as common as you might think, based on watching the news. I think if your impression of Portland is strictly from the news, probably a lot of stuff that you see on the news, us, Oregonians and people that live in and around Portland don't see that very often. You kind of have to go to certain places, and if you don't want to see it, it's definitely easy to avoid.
Yeah. I think for the suburbs, you're a little bit further away. You're a little bit insulated. You might move out to a suburb, kind of speaking as a local, you might move out to a suburb and say, I'll go downtown. I'll still go downtown and go hit up all the breweries and great restaurants downtown, and it just kind of happens less and less. So I feel like being in a suburb, especially some areas more than others, you kind of just end up staying in that area a lot. You might be living in an area where every house on your street looks very similar. The lots are going to be smaller depending on when it was developed. Although I will say there are plenty of areas in every suburb where you can find quarter acre and third of an acre lots. These are generally going to be homes that are like built in the 50s and 60s probably or earlier. Any new development, anything built probably 80s on, you're looking at lots that are no bigger than a fifth of an acre for the most part. So it's a little bit it's a little bit closer in, and so again, just kind of weighing what's important to you and what those trade-offs are. Those might be some of the things that people might complain about living in the suburbs, but there's obviously great benefits too.
I think one thing that's changed a little bit since the pandemic, and this is probably true for most cities, is you've seen people kind of leaving the cities a little bit. People leaving because they want to move into have more space. They want to move out of a condo or an apartment, and they want to get a house and have more space, or maybe they don't want to have roommates anymore, so they can be distanced from other people. So you kind of see some people moving out more towards the suburbs, and with that, we've also seen restaurants and businesses sort of follow suit and either move locations or just open up a new location out in the suburbs, whereas they were only in like downtown Portland before. So that's been kind of one sort of silver lining, if you will, to the last few years, as we have seen some good restaurants and some good businesses that have either moved or opened up new locations in the suburbs. So if you're living in the suburbs, you don't have to make that drive to downtown Portland as much anymore. Yeah,
absolutely. For the kind of country living side of things, I would say, a lot of what you'll run into is there's just not as much inventory. Inventory's low everywhere, kind of regardless of what you're looking for, but obviously in a more rural setting, there's just less houses to choose from. So it might be harder to find a place in a more rural setting. Depending on where it is. You're also going to run into things like there's not always going to be public water or public sewer. You might have to be on a septic tank or well water, and that's kind of just an extra thing in terms of maintenance that you might be looking at in more of a kind of a rural or a country setting.
Yeah. And if you don't know how any of that stuff works, that's what we're here for. Home Team Brokers,
totally.
Seth and Paul, any questions you have about that stuff, we're here to help you. All right, how about for a little added bonus, small towns?
Yeah, so kind of we talked about urban, we talked about suburban and kind of rural or country living, but kind of as a fourth bonus here, let's talk about maybe some of those small towns that are surrounding the Portland metro area, just right outside of the urban growth boundary. You can get some small town living within 30-45 minutes of downtown.
Yeah, small towns that have a small town feel, like a Sandy or a Canby, which you kind of mentioned in conjunction with Oregon City, just being south of Oregon City there. Out to the west,
Forest Grove.
Yeah,
just west of Hillsboro. I think it's probably about 50,000 people here. 50,000 people there.
Yeah, and then to the south, can't forget wine country too.
Yeah,
getting out towards Newburgh and Dayton and Dundee. A lot of little tiny towns, just 45 minutes, an hour south of Portland in Oregon wine country. Quaint little towns that get a lot of tourism due to wine country. So there's that. For better or for worse. But there's a lot of little small towns that are really nice towns. If you kind of really want more of that small town living, and for whatever reason you still need to be in semi-close proximity to Portland, there's a lot of nice small towns.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in some of these small towns too, you're going to find lower housing costs. Houses are going to be a little less expensive, compared to if you look at statistics for the Portland metro area, and you do get like kind of a good mix of all the things that we've been talking about, where you can live a half mile out of town, be in the country, or you can live right in town and kind of near some coffee shops and restaurants, or these towns are going to have a couple of neighborhoods where you can have more of a suburban feel. So I've talked to a lot of people where that's kind of a happy medium, where good price, a lot of good kind of amenities, and kind of has everything that you could want as far as just living in a place that has a lot to offer. And that's something, that we can definitely talk about. Obviously, the Portland metro area is very large, and depending on where you're going to work, what your commute's going to look like, what type of activities you want to be engaged in, and of course, like we're talking about in this video, what type of environment you want to live in overall, those are all things that we can discuss.
Yeah. So give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email. You can click the link below to schedule a Zoom with us. Anything else we want to cover?
I think that's it for today.
I think that's it. So just to recap, again, if you're not from here, you've never been here, you're thinking about moving here, and you're sort of unsure of, is there going to be like the right lifestyle or the right place for you, just know that we have a very diverse environments to live in, all the way from the city to the country and just everything in between. So we will help you find that perfect place. You just need to get in touch with us, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right, everybody, that's it. Take care.
Talk to you later.
Bye.